So I'm going to run through setting up with a K-5 on K-Stars and setting up a sequence, shooting a couple of frames. I've started with K-Stars booted just because on the Pi it does take a little while. So with K-Stars running, let's turn on ECOS with the toggle ECOS button. I've got a profile set up for just my K-5. If you click the pencil icon for Edit Profile, that lets you set it up. You'll want, if you're running this right off the Pi, you want it to be local mode. Guiding is internal for me, but probably none unless you're using a telescope with auto guiding. And the CCD should be G-Photo CCD. So that driver should already be there if you have an up-to-date StellarMate OS. That's really all you need to get going with shooting some pictures. So I'll save this even though I didn't change anything. And now all I need to do is start that profile. I've got it selected on the left, and the little auto connect checkbox was checked in the profile. I don't know if you saw that. So when I click the go button, connect over here was illuminated, but then it went out because it's auto connected. So the buttons light up green to show that we've got something going there. We get some messages here, including a warning message about the shutter speed widget. I have no idea what that does, but if the camera is set to bulb, it seems to work okay. And if we look at general info and options and all these things, I think there's somewhere in here it actually does seem to be, yeah, here it's getting the correct sensor dimensions. So we know it's actually talking to the K-5. So with the control panel, really all we have to do is just make sure that it's connected. Close that out. Now we're back in ECOS, and we can go to the camera tab, or the CCD tab as they call it. Now we've got a variety of options here. The first thing I always like to do is set up the directory, the destination for my pictures. So here I've got it just set to a folder called Demo inside my Pictures folder right on the Mate. You can set it up if you're doing something complicated with mounting remote drives. You can have it go right to a laptop or something, but in this case I'm just going to save it onto the flash card that's built into the mini SD card that's built into the Pi. So I've got really about the only capture settings you need. You want to set the exposure in seconds, and you can choose native format. That'll record. I have my camera set to do DNG, the Adobe Digital Negative format, rather than the Pentax one. But you can also have it record FITS files, which is the astronomical standard. Those take longer for ECOS to compose. Has to redo the data and stuff it into a FITS file. So when I'm shooting with the K-5, I just leave it on native. The type is light frames. You can do bias, dark, or flat frames too. And really all that does when you're set up with a DSLR like this, all that selection does is just organize the images into folders. So inside this demo folder there will be a light folder. That'll be the destination for my frames. If I were doing darks, then it'd put them in a dark. Here you can prepend a prefix to every one of your frames if you want. So I'll just say demo, and I don't have any filters. I'll put the duration on so that every image is tagged with how long the exposure was, and I'll also have it record the timestamp, and that all goes into the file name of each frame. So I've got a 1 second exposure, just one of them to go, and it's going to go into that folder tagged with those things. So if I go over here and I capture a preview, It's going to go for 1 second, then it'll download it from the camera. Takes a little bit, and then it'll show it in the FITS viewer. I've got a lens cap on the camera, so it's not going to show you a whole lot. Or rather, this is the image viewer. It's not the FITS viewer. If you were to want, and we can keep that file, I'm just going to delete it. If you wanted to use the FITS format instead of the native format, go to DNG. We do another 1 second preview image. This is kind of nice for astrophotos because it'll, as you see, it takes longer after the 1 second exposure is completed. That little wheel spins for a while. I think it's like 30 seconds or a minute. But it'll bring it up in the FITS viewer instead of just the image viewer. And this has all kinds of tasty controls on it. Usually all I use is the statistics so that I can see the min, the max. There's always, for some reason, it always maxes out at the max of the bright white for whatever camera that is. That the max isn't particularly useful. But you can see that you're getting 16-bit pixels. Not really, because it's only a 14-bit sensor output. You can see the mean and the median, though. So the median is 0. That's good, because it should be dark. And you can also auto-stretch the image if you want. This is really nice if you're doing images of the sky, because then you can stretch it right here in the viewer and see if you've got, your nebula or galaxy or whatever. And if I do that auto stretch, it's processing it. For a dark frame, it shouldn't give us too much, but you can see that there's a little variation. So that's just a little bit of inconsistency in my camera's sensor, and that's why you would want to do dark frames in the first place. So if I close this viewer, it'll say, do I want to save that file or not? I guess it just threw it away. Okay, so we've done a test image. We're pretty much ready to go. So we can set our exposure, and now I'm going to go to the mighty 3 second exposure, and I'm going to do 10 of those. I'm going to change it back to the native format just so that it runs faster. We don't get that 20 or 30 second pause. Oh, and I totally forgot. You can set the ISO here. That's kind of important. And with the camera set on bulb and the USB connection made, the driver is smart enough to do that at least. It'll run the exposure over bulb and set the correct ISO. So we've got all those settings. 3 second exposure. We're going to do 10 of them. ISO 1600 to DNG, and we're going to do light frames to this demo folder. So then I can punch that over to the sequence queue, and it appears there. And I suppose I'm going to do some high dynamic range stuff. So I'm going to do one at, we'll do another 5 frames at half a second. Everything else is the same. These will be distinguishable because of the duration. Add that to the sequence queue. And then at the end of my exhausting night's imaging, I'm going to do a bunch of dark frames. Who knows what my sensor temperature really is. So I'm going to I'll do 5 at half a second. And then I also want to do some for my 3 second exposures. So let's do those. So now we've got 3 seconds, 5 of those, add those to the queue. And if we wanted to, we could save this setup as a file, a sequence file, by using these buttons over here, and then later we could load it from disk. So you could set your camera up. Unfortunately, you can't see any of these other tabs like CCD or focus unless the camera is actually connected to the Pi and the Indy server is running to connect to it. So that's kind of a pain. Unless the camera is hooked up, you can't see half of the user interface. But if you wanted to, you could set this up at home, just like I did, and you can set up all your sequencing for the night, save it as a file, and then when you get out in the field, open that file. It'll be have a .esq file extension, and then that'll just load up your sequence ready to go. So all we have to do to make this go is punch the start sequence button, and it starts going. So it's exposing, 3 seconds left. Yay. And as it goes, it'll show each one in a preview, or at least it better. No, it's not doing that. Well, that's me totally flummoxed. Okay, so we're doing our 30 seconds of exposures, and I haven't actually done this with the K-5. I usually do it with my my mono camera, but it can be useful while this is running here and doing the sequence. It can be useful to come over to the focuser tab, and since we're right in the middle of capture right now, none of this stuff will work. But you can actually capture an image or even do a continuous sequence that'll show up on this little imaging window here. I think this works with the K-5. Like I said, I usually have my dedicated Astro camera when I'm doing this. I just mostly focus with the screen on the back of the K-5. So we're going along, and I think you see that we've almost finished our first job, and there's no reason to make you just sit and watch this for another minute or so. So I'll let it finish the first job here, and then I'll stop it. And that should be frame 10. Downloaded. And so now that one is complete, and the second one with the half-second exposures should be in progress. So I'm just going to stop that. We don't really need to see all those black frames. But if I kill that sequence and then go to Places, Home folder, and look at, what do we call it? Pictures, Demo. There's a light folder, and if we'd let this go through to shoot the darks, there would also be a dark folder. And there are all our images, which are going to be really boring images because the lens cap is on the camera. That's the basics of getting ECOS to shoot with a K-5 for you. I hope that helps, and if not, message me and we'll get it worked out.